Lovely. So nice and easy, everybody. It's chilly morning here, so as always, take that into account. Hitting the wall. As always, though, don't don't see the start as a purely physical thing. It's also about just, in a way, changing your perspective, bringing your attention somewhere else, and viewing things from that perspective, as it were. That's a bit obscure, I know, but this idea of being centered and various ways that I use to describe it, spacious, stillness, those kind of things, means that we can begin to just see what we're doing in a slightly different light. I'm not trying to say this is the only way of seeing things, by the way, but to really plumb the depths of this art, you need to recognize that the sort of mindset is different. I think one of the great things about Tai Chi, if we see it in the context of sort of fitness exercises, which is just one way of seeing it, it brings a very different perspective to most other things that we do. Complementary perspective, I'm not talking about either or. We don't stiffen and strain against the pull of gravity. We use the concept that comes from the martial side of Tai Chi of yielding to any force that acts on the body. And that's a very different sort of approach. We're not trying to, for instance, hold our heads up. What we're trying to do is to create a structure that enables our head to rest on our shoulders. We're not trying to focus on and build particular muscles, parts of the body for a particular reason, but rather to cultivate this awareness, as well as the physical reality, of our bodies working as one unit, one thing, body and mind working as one thing. Our goals are not purely physical in the sense that our minds, in one way or another, are used and developed, and quite often will feel as though they're taking a lead. People sometimes ask me about competitive Tai Chi. There are Tai Chi competitions where they judge form and when do things like push hands and who can push each other over and so on and so forth. But there was a very amusing video once on YouTube which showed a sparring match between two Tai Chi players, and they spent about 5 minutes moving around very, very slowly and not touching each other. It was obviously a slightly humorous view of the idea of Tai Chi competition. So when we reach barriers, be that a sort of muscle that's hurting or joint that's hurting or a tiredness or whatever, our way of working with those barriers is a little bit different to how we might normally perceive them. As always, you might want to rest, of course, and that's important with any physical art to bear in mind, to know what your limits are at this point, and certainly to work to extend those limits, but not to get reckless with your own body. But we might use imagery as much as we use physical skills to find ways to erode, to move around those barriers. Sometimes it might be led by a physical awareness, sometimes by an image, as I've used in the past, and so on and so forth. So be prepared to make that change. Tai Chi, of course, is a martial art. And there, there's this tradition of bowing in the martial arts. You stop at the entrance to the training hall and you bow to the teacher and you bow to your partners. Sometimes it feels as though in some martial arts you do more bowing than you do actually training. But and when, for me, one of the reasons behind that is that it gives you pause when you step into a situation where you're going to train in Tai Chi in one way or another, be it on your own or with a partner. You're sort of stepping out of a slightly more conditioned response. I sometimes find myself walking down the road and I'm kind of walking down quite kind of stiff, especially if it's cold. Like, oh, I've got to get to the, hold on a second. This is not this is not Tai Chi, if you see what I mean. And making a definite mental, okay, I'm going to move from this perspective to this perspective. So your weight slightly forwards, hips dropping back, allowing gravity to just draw your hips, draw your center of gravity downwards rather than resisting it, and feeling as you do that this very strong, dense feeling in your legs. It's just an automatic response. Remember, I've talked in the past about these two directions of movement, these two energies, if you like to think of it like that. The downward pull of gravity, which is the thing that we most often strain against, but which in Tai Chi we want to soften with. And this is the energy sometimes referred to as Liu in Tai Chi terms, Chinese terms. And then the responding energy, Peng as it's known as. And the description for Peng is really quite interesting because it's very appropriate for the feeling we can get coming up from the legs and the ground beneath our feet when we do yield, which is that they describe it as though you've got a block of wood and you push it down into water. And the very act of pushing it down means that you almost instantly feel the response of the water, which is this buoyancy of the water. So one way of understanding Peng, and it's only one way of understanding it, this rising, expanding energy, is that it's like the sort of feeling of buoyancy you get in water. And that gives us this feeling of being pushed up through our hips, and that feeling gradually rising through the rest of the body. That we want to try and let go of the impulse to stiffen up, because like in water, if you continually hold on to the, if you're in a swimming pool, you continually hold on to the side of the swimming pool, I must admit is what I tend to do, then you never actually genuinely experience the buoyancy of the water. Then just raise your arms. Shake out. Before we go on, just a word. Don't think of this as, oh right, I just change that perspective and then that's done and I can move on. In a way, everything we do is about cultivating and maintaining that awareness and that physical response. And of course, it requires you to let go of the bars of the swimming pool, which is difficult. Don't underestimate the difficulty of that. And that's where, particularly in your own time, there's nothing wrong with everything right, really, about using the wall, using something to support with, and experimenting. What happens if I soften my knees? What happens if I soften my hips? Rather than stiffen up, which is the the instinctive and the conditioned response. And this letting go is a very difficult process, I think. So, just rolling your weight forwards and backwards, Another thing which I think is quite interesting with this exercise is that our, if you like, conditioned assumption about if you want more movement in this case, what you have to do is to sort of stiffen up and strain and struggle for it. Whereas there's this lovely saying, Chinese saying, more is less, less is more. And in fact, you know, if you get into that idea, you might find, and again, you might want to use support. I stand here, I go forwards. This is as far as I can go without stiffening up. I think, well, I'll go back then. Or I could just think, well, what happens if I do let go a little bit more? Can that get me that little bit of extra movement? They're really questions that we have to find answers to ourselves. Now bring your hands out, swaying in the river. So the idea of moving through water, of meeting the density, the resistance of the water, is universal in Tai Chi, so far as I can see. It's one of the most common images, certainly one of the first images that were offered. And it's quite a useful one because we have an almost instinctive response to being in water. That doesn't make sense to you, by the way. You don't have to go down the swimming pool if you don't fancy it. Just fill your sink up with water and put your hand in it and just go from side to side and see the difference when you hold your hand tight and when you just soften, when you loosen the fingers. Feel, feel the difference in the quality of the movement. As you get more used to instructing your body through the use of imagery, programming your body through the use of imagery, see what there is to notice about how your body is actually trying to move. To go forwards if you're in water, how would your body move? To go backwards if you're in water, how would your body move? Another image is sometimes that so the air around you were thicker than normal. When I first learned this exercise, it was described in terms of you imagine the river pushing you forwards, or you imagine the river pushing you back, and then you imagine countering that. If you haven't got a convenient river to stand in, wait until it's a bit windy and just go outside. Not too strong a wind, I don't want you to get blown over, but just try this exercise going into the wind because the wind itself, as long as it's not too strong, does actually have a similar sort of quality to it, to the river moving. And then this time, letting your weight come to settle behind the balls of your feet, letting your hips drop back and push up. So all of these things, that change in perspective helps to cultivate that sense of space within the body. Different parts of the body are not working against each other, they're working with each other. So we get a particular quality, a very distinctive quality of movement. Not just in your arms, it's kind of possible to fake it in your arms, but you should be feeling it in your legs, your calves, your knees, your thighs. Don't forget to just give yourself a chance to really experience and develop that sinking, that releasing, particularly around hips and waist, but also in your shoulders and back. So that every now and then, hopefully, you get a stronger sense of the route that you're moving from. Now change into the wild goose. Apart from being a lovely image, well, for me anyway, it's, this also invokes another interesting image, which is the bird's feather. Next time you find a feather on the ground, especially if it's a biggish one, just wave it through the air a little bit. Not edge on, but front face or face on. Again, you get that sense of a resistance that's met not by a stiffening, not by a tightening, but by something that has a certain amount of suppleness, shall we call it. Quite often, the first place that we feel these qualities is in our arms and our hands, but try not to let it stop there. We want to really internalize those qualities. In the end, turn that around so it's not coming from the arms and the hands, but rather coming from deeper within. When we go into parting the clouds, though, this is like waving the feather edge on. It's the, if you see, it's the edge of the hand. So, although for the legs and so on, this is actually the same as the previous two exercises. The expression of this is somewhat different, expression in the arms. Fingers spread out a little bit, slightly curved in the joints of your fingers. Just a sense that the movement itself is starting to permeate the whole of your body, right into your fingertips and the skin. And then dragon plucks the stars from the sky, winding the hands around. An extension through the whole of your body, or the whole of one side of your body. So I've used the image of plucking an apple off a tree in the past. But another thing that's quite interesting to do is to imagine an elastic band or one of these Dynabands that they use in fitness classes. You're standing on it, and what you're going to do is you're going to slowly use that whole of your side of your body to extend the Dynaband out and to slowly let it release. If you do use something like you could use a Dynaband if you have one or something like that. If you do use what we might think of as a prop, don't overuse it. We want to get to a point where we can really encourage this way of moving through the body without equipment, without the need for additions, shall we say. So you might want to use a prop, a piece of equipment to help you give an idea of what it is you're looking for, but then you continue looking for it without it. Same thing here. You're pushing in four directions. You can imagine having one band in each hand. And perhaps this is another area where we find a different perspective to other sort of movement arts, where we're actually just if we were to use a piece of equipment, it would be in the interest of going beyond the use of that equipment rather than that being the end in itself. Some people say that that's the wrong approach in Tai Chi, that we shouldn't be using what I've just described as props. I personally think they can be quite useful, but we need to be wary of overusing them. Again, just try and be aware of areas within your body that are a bit stiff, a bit tight. Just check, your posture, how you're moving. Can you feel not just that area that is a bit blocked or tight, but what's happening in the rest of your body as well? So to see it not in an isolated sense, but in relation to everything else in your body. Can you find an image? Water flowing over a rock is one that I've used before, that helps again to just change your sort of response to that blockage. Remember, for this one, an increasingly strong focus of attention on the middle part of your body, the center, and how the movement expands from there and returns to there, and how the movement from there and to there affects the whole of the rest of your body. So one more round. And then changing. And then if it's comfortable for you, just add in the turn. Remember, if you are trying the turn and you get to a point where you're beginning to feel that resistance, that tightening is going to cut in, and then see what happens. Can you just soften in your hips a little bit, soften in your body, find that little bit more space. Always very carefully. And then switch to the other side. Again, if it's appropriate, add in the turn. And then rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. A good example of that change in perspective, where we make the work of coming upright, which can so often be such a strain. Hold your head up, chest out, shoulders back, and so on and so forth is what we're so often told. We turn it into something much softer. And as a result, coming up isn't a sort of straining, grunting experience, but rather something that feels more like an expansion, an opening. On a good day, anyway. It doesn't always work. One more time. Come to the upright position. Feel that sort of sense of almost of your head floating up and begin to move from side to side. All of these things become slightly more difficult at the point where we start to transfer the weight. I always think it's quite amusing when I've been down to London for a seminar or something like that, and you all leave at the same time and you're chatting to each other, so you end up in the tube station together, you get on the train. Of course, we've all been doing Tai Chi all day. So we're standing there and we're all kind of like, yeah, we can stand up. We don't need to do that. And everybody's sort of standing there. And then suddenly the train starts to move and we're sort of, oh, whoa, hold on a second. We're grabbing hold of things because it's just not so easy. So as soon as you add that process of movement, of change into the equation, it becomes quite challenging to maintain those principles, if you like, to maintain that perspective. Again, you can do this one imagining that you're moving in water. And you move across, sink down, remember, and turn. Go back, sink down, turn. Going back to what I was saying a little bit earlier about this tradition of bowing in the martial arts, I think in a way that moment when we settle and sink, there's kind of pausing quality to it, actually can serve in the same way. Just sort of, if you like, pause on the threshold. Your body begin to turn, your heel coming up. Bring your hands in front of you. Imagine as you're doing this that you've got a couple of, I don't know, cups of tea or glasses of something nice in your hand, and they're full to the brim, and you don't want to spill them. So your body's moving, but there's a quality, quietness, of stillness that you want you need to sustain in your hand, because if you did have a cup of tea in your hand and you went like that, you'll spill it everywhere. You're all familiar with that. This is one way in which we help to internalize the movements, to go beyond just the arms moving, and to feel how what's happening in our feet and our ankles and so on are actually contributing to the movement, taking away the need to sort of flap your arms around. It's also quite interesting to notice how quickly we revert to simply using our arms. And then hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. That moving back into just moving our arms is very common. We all do it. If your legs are getting tired, there'll be a part of you that's sort of resisting the idea of keep working the legs. This is where the physical conditioning that comes through practice can help. You can sustain that whole body movement much more. This is something that, in my experience, even people quite experienced in other sports, other physical activities, find quite difficult. But what we get, therefore, is a very dynamic, very strong image of movement. We're hitting the ball. And again, that quieter quality permeating through your body means you get a greater sense of the flow, the energy within the movement, and the greater ability to work creatively with these three jewels, the three treasures as they're sometimes referred to: body, mind, and energy. Body, mind, and movement. One more on each side. And then more expansive, cow gazes at the moon. As always, very careful as you do this. To start off with, you should still be looking diagonally forward. So, you know, you're in a square room, you'll be facing one or other of the corners in front of you. And that should give you a chance just to get a feeling for what's happening within your body with this movement to begin with. Remember, your hands are spread out, the palm out here, and they swing down to their full length as they come to this position here. Quite strong in your back and your shoulders. So if you want to go a little bit further, do so very carefully, because there's a danger that you can twist your back up. But again, the way that we would approach it is not by straining, which almost certainly will affect your back, but by releasing. So if I exaggerate, I'll probably fall over because I'm exaggerating. But I can get to here, and then if I want more, what I would do is, if you watch my hips, I mean, I've gone way out of line. This is not comfortable, but it wasn't this to do that. It was this. It was the sinking down that allowed for that extra movement. but that was exaggerated. I'm going to do too many of those. One more on each side. So when you come back now, you bring your weight to the middle. Take a moment to adjust your feet, your stance, but try and keep the arms moving, this time going around in a full circle. So you're holding the ball between the palms of your hands. And as you get used to this movement, just get a sense of pressing into the ball a little bit. Not too much, like you might be holding a cat or a dog or a baby there, enough to feel that it's secure, not so much that you're going to crush it. Feel what parts of your body you're using to do that with. And then go back the other way. The circle is in many ways the basic unit of movement in Tai Chi. It's a natural pattern for your arm to swing round in. It's attached at one end, not at the other, of course. One more time. So now, start with your weight moving. Use one arm, let it go through the circle, and let it rotate. So similar in some ways to parting the clouds. It's very easy to overshoot with the weight. So what you might want to do is take a slightly wider stance for this. And this gives you a little bit more room and it's easier, a better way of feeling how these different elements of the movement, the sinking down, the transfer of your weight, the turning in the centre work together. And the narrower stance, they're all there, but the weight transfer in particular is very subtle, easily lost or overdone. So this is the silk reeling. Imagine your hands like a paintbrush. You're painting a circle on the wall. The fingers are like the bristles of the brush. And then with your other hand, for your arm to go up and down, it needs to be pushed into that. So there's an expansion through the side of your body, coming up from the legs. These paired movements, Yu and Peng, downward yielding movement, the rise and expanding movement, working to do that. And then both hands together, wave hands like clouds. The top hand shouldn't go above shoulder height. And in fact, if you think about the alignment of your head, remember I said before about it, slightly, the angle of your eyes slightly downwards. What will happen is when your hand comes to here, there you're able to just look across the fingers a little bit. If you actually focus on your fingers, then there'll be a slight change in focus in your eyes as you move through this. What you may find after a while is that this becomes a bit difficult because by focusing on your fingers, you're sort of cutting off the broader view. Sometimes you can feel a bit disorientated if you do that. So be careful with that. It's said to be a way of exercising the muscles around your eyes. Good. And shake out. There's another exercise that you can do the same thing with, watching the hands. Some of you would have done this with me, some of you won't. So we'll take it from the beginning. It's the exercise the archer. Which I do with you occasionally. It's actually quite a nice exercise. I really should do it more often. It's this image of somebody drawing a bow, as in a bow and arrow, and then releasing the arrow. Initially, we feel it very much in the upper part of the body, but of course, it very much depends on this sinking down, because if you're too tight in the upper part of your body, there's not enough space for the movement. So I suggest you mirror my movement. Start with your hands folded across your body. Push your left hand out to the side and draw back with the right hand. It's just the fingers are hooked slightly, as though they're hooked around the string of the bow. You can either go to there with the elbow out, or you can bring your elbow behind. I personally prefer this way, but just be careful if you do that what you don't do is this. You're not pulling your shoulder out, you're just pulling back there. It's very rare that the elbow will go behind the shoulder in these exercises. And then you swing across and you bring your hand across to the left hand as far as you can to this side. Again, don't do this. Pull the shoulder out of line. Just feel how far it's going to go. There's a nice opening across your back, and then come back to the center and do the same thing on the other side. When you've done this a few times, very carefully, especially if you're feeling a bit tight in your neck, you can actually turn your head and you can watch the hand as it goes away and then as it comes around. And again, you get that change in the focus of your eyes. So when we do this, the front of our body, the chest will open out nicely. And then when we do this, the chest contracts and the back between your shoulder blades opens. Remember, hips dropping back. Surprisingly strong exercise in the upper part of your body. Very good for just opening your rib cage out, opening your shoulders out, and your back, the upper back. But that's an area that can get awfully tight, so very carefully. There's any number of variations on this particular exercise I've found over the years. One favourite of mine is to move the weight as you do this, and again I would generally do this in a slightly wider stance. And now I sit back as I push the hand out, and I come around, and as the hands come to the middle of the chest, weight comes to the centre, and then into the other side. So here we can again feel the legs very much engaged with the movement. Fingers are spread out, and be particularly aware of the space between your thumb and your forefinger. If you get really precise about it, that's where you're looking through. That's where you're going to fire the arrow to. There's another very interesting element to this, which is the timing of the movement. Remember, we never want to stiffen up. So the change comes at a particular point, and we become aware of that point of change. When we've reached the fullest extent of the movement, there is then the change back. And that's not talking about it, I'm now doing it wrong. Because it's not a sort of intellectual thing. It's very much to do with a sort of intuitive awareness. And it's that sense of this is the right moment to release. It is something that is found in the Japanese art of Kyudo, which is sometimes referred to as Zen archery, where they're reputedly less interested in the target than in finding that appropriate moment of release. And there was a book written some years ago now by a guy called Herigel called Zen and the Art of Archery, because it's very much a kind of meditational practice, the Kyoto. And he used the phrase that I think came from the Japanese, that we don't shoot the arrow, but the arrow shoots itself. In other words, you get to a particular point of feeling, or however you would describe it, and then the change comes. And again, this is something that we find we do quite regularly. When we're children, we get taught how to cross the road. It's the Green Cross Code now, isn't it? Or something, you look and so on and so forth. But actually, the truth is, if you're walking down the road and you want to cross the road, then there's a kind of right moment. And sometimes, if you're walking down the road with a friend and you know you're going to cross over, suddenly the friend will disappear, or you'll disappear from their vision, because for you that was the right moment. And it's this intuitive sense where all the information that's available to us through our senses and so on and so forth has fed into that. Now is the right time to go. It might not have been the right time for your friend. And so once we start to build these exercises, that I'm not even sure that intuitive is the right term, but I should continue using it, because I don't want to get into an English language lesson. But this sense of knowing, if you like, and the archer seems to really demonstrate that very well. But it's actually something that we want to find in all of the movements. So have one foot forwards. And again, that there's that moment of settling in or pausing, just like if you do a martial art, you pause at the threshold of the hall and whatever bow is required before you move in. The chance to just consider a sense of stillness, of space, and that too, you can feel that that right moment when the balance between those two forces that act on the body, the downward pull of gravity that we yield to, the resilience, the springiness in your legs, sort of shifts. The strength of the legs, if you like to think of it like that, overcomes the pull of gravity. We wait for that moment. I've actually never been surfing, but I've read accounts of surfers who have talked about this, finding the right moment to enter the wave. Again, this is not restricted to Tai Chi practice. These are really just everyday activities for us, but we can develop those qualities. Shake out. And then on the other side. Realize that what you're doing in developing these qualities is that you're also developing the meditational side of Tai Chi. That this idea of pausing isn't just to look around the room or something like that. We actually benefit from those moments of pausing, of quietness, of stillness in our minds. Good. Shake out. Okay, so sit back, have your hands, and again, unusually, oh, no, it's rare, really. So your hands are slightly behind your hips. You go forwards, elbows are soft, and your hands just slide around the curve. And then back. Now, push up from your legs, connecting to the opening and closing in your chest, your back. All one movement. And see if you can again get to that point where you're not thinking, is this the right moment to release the arrow? It releases itself. A change to fisherman cast a net. So all these things are qualities that make a huge contribution to what I would think of as a sense of well-being, not just fitness or healing or good health, but just an overall sense of being much more in touch with ourselves and much more able to negotiate the sort of ebb and flow of life without so much tension, so much tightening. And in a different way to how we might normally respond. Look for that different perspective. Not stuck in one way of doing things. And then pushing a wave. And then on the other side, sit back. changing. And change. And shake. Good. So rub your hands together. And tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. On the other side. Your back. Around your hips. Your legs. Light on your belly. And the upper part of your chest. Good. And then, once again, sinking down, embrace tiger, return to mountain. And again, there's a sense of how far we can reach out to embrace the tiger before the balance shifts and we once again return to the mountain. And the other way around, having returned to the mountain, there's a point where we feel ourselves being pushed up and out again. One more round. And once again, just stand and pause. Check out. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. As always, feel free if you have any questions, either say them now or if you'd rather.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you
Thanks,
next
week.